Awesome. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Nicole McCowan. I am the Director of Annual Giving and Constituency Engagement here at Hanover College. And I'm so excited to have you all join us tonight for this first workshop that we're doing. I'd also like to thank our panelists, and I'll go ahead and introduce them. Zach Kirkendall, Katie Green, Vicki Hidalgo, and Rachana Wood. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I appreciate your participation in this. So I'll go around in a minute and have our hosts kind of introduce themselves further, talk about their connection with Hanover and kind of their work experience has brought them to this current state of being expert salary negotiators for us as well. And then if anybody has any questions like throughout the session, please unmute yourselves or put it in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. So I will go ahead and start with Zach. If you could introduce yourself, that'd be wonderful.
Hi, everybody. Zach Kirkendall. I graduated 10 years ago this May, so it's been a long time, but I was an international studies major, and then I also did the business scholars program while I was in, and then I'm one of the rare, I would say, millennials that has been in one organization for his entire career. I interned at Cummins my junior year, and then was offered a full-time position there at the plant in Seymour, the high horsepower plant there. Once I graduated, I did an MBA program, went through a couple of different roles doing new product introduction, and then moved through to a recruiting role with the company and did that for a couple of years. And now I am the global talent, technology, and process leader for the organization. So I kind of focus on talent acquisition and some of the other talent management systems that everybody gets to go through as they try and get on with the company or do their performance reviews at the end of the year. So happy to be here. Appreciate everybody's time.
Thanks, Zach. Katie, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, so my name's Katie. I graduated in 2018. So I've been out 4 years, which is crazy. I've now been out as long as I was in, which is sad.
It just gets worse.
Yeah. But right when I graduated, I got into recruiting, but more on the staffing side. So I was involved in more so technical recruiting, and then I made the transition to more internal recruiting and talent acquisition. So I currently work for Roche Diagnostics. So we're a diagnostics and pharmaceutical company. Specifically, I work within our diabetes care division. So we do a lot with glucose monitoring. And I recruit on roles within like quality and operations, and just manage kind of the full recruiting lifecycle. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Katie. Vicki, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Vicki Hidalgo here. I had the opportunity to be part of the Hanover community in the admissions office a little while back. So it's good to kind of reconnect and see some familiar faces here. Currently, I work for US Bank and have been with the bank now for about 4 years in different roles, all through early talent and campus recruiting programs. Today, I have the pleasure of leading the team in recruiting nationwide, as well as standing up programs for full-time development and leadership development for students coming right out of college. And so we do a lot of training and connection points on comp and negotiation and how we might go about that. And we build our own compensation structures as well. So I'm hoping to shed a little bit of light around that today. Thanks for having me.
You're on mute, Nicole.
Okay, thank God. I thought it was me. Okay.
No, I was going to say, okay. Rachana, if you'd like to go next.
So I must be the oldest in the crowd because I graduated from Hanover in 1994. So listening to the three of you speak about your experiences, I think I'm definitely going to learn more than I'm going to be able to contribute tonight. My whole career has been in human resources. I did my master's at Purdue University, MSHR, and then started my first 9 years in Carrier, where I did all facets of HR, recruiting, talent management, employee relations, labor relations, negotiated 3 contracts. It was incredible. Then moved to Shell, and I spent 13 years at Royal Dutch Shell, where I was just basically a global leader for different parts of the organization. Then I went to a startup for 2.5 years. So I got to do the whole building HR from ground up, right? We had an ATS applicant tracking system, coached up a recruiting organization, worked with partners in recruiting, built the HR systems, you name it. So it was kind of just a way for me to take a break from corporate, I guess, and do something more fun. And then the last 3 years, I've been in Grundfos. So Grundfos is a Danish organization that makes pumps, like sump pumps and industrial pumps and so on. And I'm the global head of HR for one of our 4 divisions based out of Houston. Really happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So I have a series of questions that we can kind of get started with that'll help us kind of drum up some conversation. And feel free, again, if any of you all have questions, just unmute yourself, put it in the chat box, and we're more than happy to answer those throughout as well. So I guess we can go ahead and start at the beginning. How do you start researching about salary negotiation? How do you research an appropriate pay rate or salary for your position in the industry in which you're currently in, or an industry that you would like to go into?
I can go first. For me, anything and everything can be found on Google, right? So that's usually my first stop. I find it interesting. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the Colorado legislation that has recently come out that requires employers to list their salaries, either a range or some kind of band. But that's something that I'm wrestling with currently. How do we standardize it and get it into our systems? So I do think from a trajectory standpoint, salary transparency is going to be more the norm in the future. But if I'm going out and looking for a particular role, maybe that I'm interested in or want to grow into, that's outside of Cummins, where the salary ranges are pretty well posted internally. I would do a search. I would probably get on Indeed or LinkedIn and look for other relevant position postings first as a market kind of gathering, and then gauge where my experience is within that range, right? So that's always something you want to factor in is how many years of experience do you have, and does that, where would that fit within that salary range?
Yeah, I'll add to Zach's comment here. I think I would think about if it's a move you're trying to do internal versus external. I think internal, considering you just have more knowledge, and so definitely connecting with the folks or understanding the different leveling or structures just give you some of those weapons to understand, like, really what should that look like, what should that range look like. I think in a well-developed organization that seems to be relatively transparent in terms of ranges, compensation ranges. So if you can be aware of that, that's helpful. If it's not a well-developed organization, right, then there's a little more gray area. So I think that's where networks and probably having really honest conversations too with your manager or with the leaders that you seek as mentors play well for you. And it's a tactic I've personally used, as well as one that I typically recommend for other folks internal. But external, I align with Zach, and probably then just if you know people in the organization that you're trying to get into would probably be another item to look at.
Yeah, and just to build on what both of you said, I fully agree. When I think about externally looking at possible salaries, especially if you're looking, if you're at the point where you're kind of trying to negotiate your offer, I do advise. Like you said, right? Look at Google. Google does have answers, but be very careful, because Google sometimes gives you national information. And I'll give you a classic example. I had someone I was mentoring who lives in Indiana, making about $46,000 a year, looking to move to Connecticut, right? So if you look at Google and you do the cost of living adjustment, it's about $75,000-$80,000, right, is what you would need to make in Connecticut. And so looking at jobs, right, the expectation was, all right, so that's what I'm going to go with as I present it, right, without doing the proper research. The job offer came in at $41,000, which was less than this individual was making in Indiana. So it's really about making sure, right, that it's there is some balancing as well.
Yeah, and to chime in and just pretty much echo. Google obviously is great, but like Vicky was saying, I do think it's so important to talk to people in the industry who are doing the same types of jobs, maybe talk about like their career growth, where they were at. I think it's important how, even like Zach said, how there's going to be more salary transparency. I think that's with companies, but I also think that's can be important with the individual employee, to talk about, you know, what you're making. I think of even when I was on the other side and I was job searching to find a recruiter job, I was talking to my past colleagues on, hey, what were you seeing when you were interviewing? What job offers did you get? What are you seeing out there? And then even as I was interviewing and talking to other recruiters, funny enough, I would start to pick up on what the market value actually was, based on other people's experiences. So I think you shouldn't be scared to talk about money and salary. It's a super, super important aspect of any job.
And
Just make one more. Oh, sorry, Zach, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from larger organizations, I would make sure that you really understand like what your pay structure and equity increase or adjustments look like, because a lot of times people leave money on the table when they don't know that, you know, I should be being equity evaluated at, you know, 2 years into the role or 3 years into the role, right? And they don't know it. The policy's there, you can go out and find it, but it's not something that a lot of HR groups advertise. And I would just make sure that you understand like when you can be evaluated for an equity increase versus maybe another role or promotion, which is another way to kind of get some more money into the bank. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Just kind of building on that as well. The other piece of it is also, you might want to make sure that you're looking at total compensation. So it's not just salary, right? So I want $80,000, great. But what does that mean? So if your cost of benefits is $6,000 a year and someone offers you $77,000, but your cost of benefits for a year is $3,000, right? You're actually better off with a $77,000 salary. Or what's the 401k match, right? What's the vacation? So it's really about looking at it from an end-to-end standpoint and not just being fixated on the dollar amount, because I also believe that a lot of times, you know, the grass is greener on the other side. And then when you go, you realize kind of the non-tangible benefits that you've missed out on that were available in your current company, if that makes any sense.
Great points.
All really great answers. So looking at this from somebody who is recently graduated and going to the workforce, what is an appropriate time to bring up pay rate, salary, and benefits during an interview or application process?
I'm going to kick us off with that one. I think most of the time you can be super transparent up front, maybe just with asking the question to your recruiter. And Zach, Katie, with your experience, like chime in, please. But at least for my team and the way we operate, it's something that we're pretty transparent on as a whole at US Bank. And just in informationals, you can easily ask, like, what's the range of this opportunity? And that's shared with you so that you also aren't wasting your time, because that's a volume game too for recruiters, right? On the talent acquisition side, to make sure we're not spinning our wheels with people who are probably not going to accept an offer. And so we see it as a two-way benefit.
I agree with that. I think coming from the recruiter side, like, I don't get offended or it doesn't bother me if someone's asking about salary. I would think that's to be expected. Sometimes I can't give an exact range in that initial phone call, which can be tricky because a lot of times, depending upon the role, your interview performance will put you into a certain level at the job, and then we have a range for that. And so it's hard sometimes up front as a recruiter to give a range. I can give like a huge range, but then it will be flexible. But I always encourage people to ask. I expect people to want to have that conversation up front. And like Vicky said, it does protect time. It protects my time as a recruiter, and it protects your time who, you know, as a candidate, maybe you have to take time off work to interview, and you just want to be respectful of everyone's time all around. So it's not fun to get to an offer stage as a recruiter and then realize, oh, we are not on the same page compensation wise. So if I can avoid that, that's good all around.
Yeah, and exactly, and you lose credibility so. For example, especially coming in with experience, you know what you're willing to take, right? So you know your ballpark, and so when you ask that question and you hear, a caution is, if you know for sure that there's no way in heck that you're going to take the offer, you're better off exiting at that point in time. Sometimes, sometimes individuals prefer to go, let me just impress the heck out of them. Maybe they will eke out another $5, $6, $7, $8,000, and that rarely happens, because usually recruiters try to be as transparent as possible with the ranges, right? So unless and the thing is, if you do that a lot, in the recruiting community, you will be flagged as high maintenance, right? So it is something to be careful about in terms of how you present yourself, not just to this organization, because again, there is a there's a lot of connectivity in this field, and you don't want that to become your reputation.
Go ahead, Zach.
No, you're fine, Vicky. I always like to compare this to car shopping, and so like the historical car shopping experience is you go and talk to the salesman, and you'd have a long drawn out negotiation period, and you'd settle on a number, and you get them to come way down and get you a bargain, and that's kind of like the old school salary negotiation. Is like you come in, you'd build them up, and they would come in at a number. But in this day and age, with so much transparency in place and so much competition, it's really limiting down how much, I would say, wiggle room there is in salary negotiation. And I think, to my point earlier about some of this pay transparency legislation, it's I think we're on the 5-year time window of having all employers having to display their salary ranges. And so people, as a candidate, will be able to see, okay, is this range for this role what I want to do? But within that range, there's only going to be so much flexibility, right? So it's a kind of a double-edged sword that I think is coming here soon.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add, kind of after Chana mentioned, if you're 5, 6, 7,000 above what they share, I think you should always ask if there's opportunity, right? Like, here's where I was hoping to land. Is there opportunity within role? Because as Katie mentioned earlier, right, sometimes depending on the role, there may be different tiers that you're looking at, or even that recruiter may have another role that you could fit into it that is that similar skill set or whatnot. So definitely ask. And then the other piece of advice I would say is always, as a candidate, always have your research done and have a range in mind that you would be willing to take, because the most common question back from a recruiter after you ask what the range is, they might say, well, what were you thinking? Or kind of turn the question back over your way. So if you aren't either prepared and or can skillfully avoid it and ask for a range again, then you're going to get stuck in a little. That's probably when candidates feel the most uncomfortable, and they're like, and then it kind of teeters off in an interview process or in an informational call.
What would be a way that you could ask them again for those pay range then? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I would just say, something I'm still trying to really figure out. Can you share with me? I assume you have, you could just say, I assume you already have a range for this role. Is there any detail you can provide me about that? Literally just ask the question again. And they will typically would be like, got it. You don't want to tell me, let me share.
Any recruiter worth their salt will do that and share that information with you if you ask.
Yeah, for sure.
And an answer or a response I get a lot from candidates is they'll say something like, salary or total compensation is only one part of my decision-making process. And so before giving a range, I would love to know a little bit more about the responsibilities of this role, and then I can better answer your question. So I get that all the time for people to throw it back on me. So then I give the range up. But as a recruiter, we are on your side. I want to fill the position. I want someone to get hired. And so some people, I think, can have the wrong idea of recruiters, that maybe we're not on the same team, but we definitely are. So your recruiter is kind of like your messenger. And a lot of times, I'll advocate for candidates. I'll help. If they have a good business case, I'm like an advocate for them sometimes. So definitely utilize the recruiter to your advantage.
So I'm going to bring in a little bit of a different perspective, because I fully agree with all what the three of you said. For me on the other side, so if I were the lens of the hiring manager and I'm working with my recruiting partner to try to bring in a candidate, right? Absolutely, we want to get the best, and so fully rely on that collaboration we have with our talent acquisition partners to get the best candidate in. But if I start hearing from my talent acquisition partner, hey, they coming back with a little bit more. And so again, I agree with you, Vicky, what you said, right? Ask the first time. If you don't ask, the worst that can happen is the answer is no. But once the answer is no, step back, right? Because a lot of times people will push, right? And go, so I'll make you an $80,000 offer. No, can I have 85 and then 82? And it's just that going back and forth and so on. At some point as a hiring manager, my feedback is, you know what? They're going to leave for the next $500. Is it worth the investment of this individual? So again, it's also how you're being perceived, not just at the first point of introduction, right? But further in, because when you come to the offer part, the hiring manager gets involved as well.
You've got, I think, really like one turnaround of negotiation that's reasonable to expect, and then anything after that, you're pushing your pushing your limit.
So how could you position yourself to have a better response after that first negotiation? Like, how can you use your work experience to really pivot the conversation to where you have the highest chance of getting a better offer on the second time?
So I would think it makes most sense to negotiate after a verbal offer is given. So I would definitely not approach the first conversation with like trying to negotiate, but you can have that initial like, oh, this is the range that I'm looking for. But from my experience, almost all the negotiating comes after an offer is given. And so part of that is definitely your past experience, putting together a business case on kind of what you're doing, how ultimately, hopefully you maybe could save the company time or save them time or money or whatever it may be, bring up specific examples. Also, don't be scared to leverage other offers that you have. Like that is so common. Be truthful about it and be very straightforward. But that's a conversation I expect to have. I would be super naive as a recruiter to think that my opportunity is the only one that a candidate is interviewing for. And so tell the recruiter that, I do have other offers on the table for this amount of money. Is there anything we can do? Excuse me. Is there anything we can do? Like, this is an opportunity I'm really excited about. So be professional about it, but also be excited. I think approaching it with a positive attitude, being eager, and saying like, how can we make this work together? Because I want this. And so definitely leverage past offers, or not past offers, current offers, and just anything you think you have a leg up on that would really help the company.
I guess additionally, why do you all think that salary negotiating is so intimidating for individuals? And then how would you combat those feelings?
It's a power dynamic, right? The recruiting or whatever organization you're applying to typically has all the information and all the cards in that negotiating table. And depending on the market, which we're in a very, would say, employee-focused market or talent market, there's, I would say the pendulum has swung the other way. But for the past 10 years, right, the companies and the organizations have had a lot of power. It's something that I think is going to continue to ebb and flow, but at this point in the market, the world is your oyster when it comes to negotiating power and what you can kind of command for specific degrees or expertise.
I think it can be intimidating for several reasons, right? And depending on your life experience as well. But first and foremost, I think it's having confidence in yourself and knowing your own value. I think that's where most people probably get stuck. Then you have the layer of like, if you are a part of a marginalized group, right? Or have been first generation student or have who have attended a school where maybe their career center, unlike Hanover, like isn't as strong, right, or whatnot, right? So there are different things that maybe you just literally don't know, and I'm sure that they can be super intimidating. So it's all about being willing to learn, I think, and kind of proactively doing your research so that you feel more confident. But at the end of the day, like I would always say, like, just ask. And if that it's once you do it a few times, then you'll start to get to the place where you're feeling more comfortable. But I think the biggest barrier is having confidence in your own value and understanding that. The other thing too is if you are in role, you can put feelers out and understand, right? Like apply to other roles similar to yours and get a sense of what, if you're trying to negotiate internally, like get a sense of what you're worth out in the market. And this current time right now, to Zach's point, talent is like has the card. So if you have an understanding of what your role or what your skill set is worth out in the industry, there's I probably shouldn't be saying this, but there's nothing wrong with going out, getting feelers, applying to different places, interviewing, getting an offer, and then coming back to really understand where you're at, or even understanding the ranges for the roles that you are applying to, right? And then
Always
coming
be
back
applying,
to
right?
Yep, exactly. Know your worth to your current employer and say, hey, here are options, but my preference is actually to stay here because this is what I know and how I want to contribute to this organization. But I know what my value is.
And just to build on that, something that I've told my mentees throughout the years has been, I think what you guys said is absolutely right. A lot of it is underpinned by just it's not even lack of self-confidence. It might be humility. It might just be, just that, how do I get it out there? How can I be articulate? And so what I say is take a blank, and this is even for interviews, right? Before you even hit the offer stage, take a blank piece of paper and write down, right? What are your strengths? What can you bring into an organization? And how will they benefit? Because you need to be confident in your self-worth, right? And really have that confidence. And I think going in with that confidence it's worth so much, because it does build a level of credibility where the person you're talking to then is like, okay, they believe in themselves, and they're giving me a good reason, right? And so it really does help drive a more favorable conversation for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just expected now to negotiate. Like it would really surprise me if I gave an offer to someone and they didn't try to negotiate at all. And so it's not like overstepping, it's not being rude or greedy or anything like that. It's really just kind of how it is. And I've never seen an offer get revoked from someone trying to negotiate salary. And so I've never seen that happen. And the worst they can say is, no, we don't have flexibility. And then there's also some other options, like maybe you can talk about a sign-on bonus or extra PTO or a guaranteed performance review at 6 months or a year. And then if things are going well, you get a jump from there. And so like we mentioned earlier, it's not just about that base salary. There's a lot of different avenues that you can try to negotiate to get an overall better compensation package for you.
And just to build on that, Katie, because you're absolutely right. One of the things is, as Zach said, this is a candidate's market right now, kind of like the housing market, it seems, right? And so there are more opportunities for employment, right? And so part of it is, right, how do I negotiate the best salary, but also it's how do I make sure I'm going to the right organization? And one of the questions that oftentimes I think is not asked as often as it should be is what's my employee value proposition for being an employee here? So it's not just my total comp and benefits, but what's the culture like, right? What's the work environment like? Because those are all things that at the end of the day, the salary just gets you in the door. What keeps you is really the rest of these things, right? So it's making sure that you understand that aspect as well, because that's a big part of your experience in an organization.
I had sort of a follow-up question to that. Hi, everyone. My name's Kay. I'm a graduate of 2016. So if you are receiving an offer, then is there a decent percentage that you can ask over that offer amount in the negotiation process?
I think I think before you apply for a particular role, you need to probably have done some research on what that range is for that type of position, and know going into that negotiation, like where that range would land you. Are you within the range? Are you close to the top end? Or are you close on the bottom end? And that's going to shape what your response should be, right? So if I'm on the top end of that in a $20,000 band, right? Like I may only have, it may only be reasonable to ask for like a $5,000 increase maximum, right? Versus if they slot me in a market rate that's at the very bottom end of that 20,000, you may want to push the limit and ask for like 10,000 or double digits in terms of an increase. But it really depends on that research that you've done leading up to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add there, Kate, just some of the stuff Katie talked about earlier, right? If you have another offer, or if you are in final stages of another opportunity, that's why it's good to do this. If you're going to do it, if you're applying, like apply and get yourself a really good, give yourself options, and then understand too what you're leaving on the table. If you're at an organization that gives like bonuses, or maybe you did a sign-on bonus with the previous company and your payback period, you're still within it. You can always ask for, if it's not an increase in base, hey, I'm leaving this on the table. Is there an opportunity to add this onto my offer? So I think it's just about, rather than a percentage, like just where you sit as a candidate compared to the overlaying field.
I guess
Did
to follow up with
that answer your question, Kay? Did that
Yes,
help?
thank you.
Okay, great.
Just to follow up with that, so you've just received an offer from like a company, like how do you organize your thoughts to, and it is within the pay range and there's like a little bit of a buffer there, how do you organize your thoughts to give a counter offer of why you should be paid the extra amount?
I'm of the opinion that you don't need to justify your worth and what that range may be. So, I mean, the response could be as simple as, to make things work, I really need to be at this dollar amount, right? And like again, back to that like old school car salesman piece, like they're looking for you to justify, or recruiters are looking for you to justify so that they can respond back. If it's as simple as like, this is what I need, there's really no negotiation on their end to come back at you with, and that's what I would recommend. Know your worth and just put it out there. I don't know if others have different perspectives on that.
No, I actually agree with that. I think short and sweet, to the point. Like, I think sometimes there's nothing wrong with expressing that you're thankful and you're excited about the offer. I think that's always important to show that side, but then to just say, like you said, to make this work, I would love a little bit of flexibility, or, whatever it may be, to also justify leaving your current job. So a lot of people say that, in order to justify leaving my good, stable job, I want to make sure I'm progressing financially as well, and I'd be more comfortable at this rate. So it doesn't have to be overcomplicated.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had a question coming up, but it completely flew away from my mind right as I was about to ask it. So let me get it together real quick.
I've got a question, Nicole.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll save you. So I'm wondering if anyone could weigh in on how much weight experience has versus educational experience in the process.
Excellent question. Very valid question, Kelly, because it does. I think it's a couple of things, in my opinion, and I'd love to hear from the others as well. So what I've experienced is, the more experience you have under your belt, the less education level matters, right? It doesn't matter if it's an associate's, bachelor's, or master's. It also depends on the company and the position that you're looking for. So and it's a horrible thing to say, right? But Shell, for example, had for the first 8 years of it, so we called it early career, was very specific about only hiring from target colleges and universities. So to get in with if you weren't in those target colleges and universities was almost impossible. Yet 15 years of experience puts you in a different kind of level of experience roles, and it was much easier to get in. So I think there's not a one-stop answer for it, but certainly, unless companies have specific policies, experience definitely outweighs the education. Both are extremely important, but it's easier to be able to sell yourself, right? If you have the relevant experience against someone who might have a university degree without that experience.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. And I will always lean, Kelly, on the basic requirements of the role and even the preferred requirements, like kind of what's listed. They basically tell you, what they're looking at and what may weigh more. But I think as a whole, I would probably lean more on experience weighing in, unless you're a current college student, right? Then that looks differently, and the programs and roles you might be applying for are totally different.
That's what I suspected.
I'm curious if any of the other panel members are a federal contractor. Okay. So at Cummins, due to our federal contract status, we have to really comply with the EEOC guidelines, and there's I think a probably stricter standard than most on, what the minimum requirements to Vicky's point of the role are. So anytime you see one of our postings, it should have, we would expect to have X number of years of experience and this level of education or equivalent experience. So we like to make equivalencies across those two dynamics. And that way, we're being as inclusive as we can, but it still gives us the option to kind of screen and sort candidates from, the level of qualification that they have. Great question.
Thank you.
I suppose sort of bridging that question, is there a way to maybe not quantify, but is there a way that graduate experience sort of translates if you're a graduate assistant and working in whatever this field is at the same time as getting your degree? How does that work out equivalency wise?
So I don't have a mathematical answer. Sorry, Vicky, I think I jumped in ahead of you.
Go for it. Go for it.
I don't have a mathematical answer for it, but I will say it's all in the sales pitch. So it's about how you position yourself, right? It's how does your degree helps, right? If I'm getting a degree in business, then yeah, I'm going to be working towards business. But if you're doing a graduate assistantship or an internship with an organization concurrently, the experience you're getting, it's almost one for one, because you can sell that experience to say, I've been doing this. So it's really about how you sell yourself. To capitalize on the fact that you're doing both versus, one at a time. And I don't think it's a disadvantage to you. It's really about how you position yourself.
List it out separately in your resume, because I'm looking at technology that will analyze a lot of that and do a lot of auto calculation of that experience, and it'll quantify your education level as well. So put it on there. If you're doing it simultaneously, list them separately, and that way things like that will pick it up and kind of build your score up a little bit, so to speak.
Exactly what I was going to say. Yep. Make sure that it's listed in your resume as a job, right? In addition to your education degree and while you were enrolled in the program, because that definitely gets picked up by technology on the back end.
And technology is getting very scary very quickly. Especially on the recruiting side.
Thanks.
I'm in technology. Can you elaborate on that, Zach?
Yeah, absolutely. And we mentioned the applicant tracking system, which is, when you apply, everybody goes into a kind of a central repository, and there's different companies that support that kind of work. But there's also what we call supplemental tools that will automatically review resumes and compare that to the job requirements in a posting. and it'll say this person's a great fit, or this person's a mediocre fit, or this person doesn't meet the minimum requirements. And there's things that can happen to automatically progress folks that are a great fit to interviewing with a manager, and then there's others that will disposition you out and say, you didn't meet the minimum requirements. Here's some other opportunities you may be interested in, and all of that happens sometimes without a recruiter even looking at your resume. And so it's the technology to be able to go out and do that, but also look at talent pools that maybe haven't even applied yet and apply that logic is really where the future is headed. And I think it's going to get to a point, we're looking at a solution now that does on-demand interview scoring, and it uses natural language processing of your responses. So like you respond to a prompt, I ask you a question, you respond to it, the system records that, translates it to text, and then scores what you said dynamically, and then makes a hiring decision based off of it. So like Walmart is currently using something like this to hire all of their warehouse associates at scale. And so there's really no human intervention, and that makes people very uncomfortable. But these algorithms are getting so sophisticated that I think in the next 10, 15 years, there's going to be a lot of selection that happens in this way.
It's wild. It's super crazy. But Kelly, to add to that, we at US Bank just now integrated a technology that on the front, so in our CRM, right, or where we keep our leads, they start to do automated sourcing. So think of a dating app essentially, and that similar logic where even if you submit your information for like, I want to join your talent community, right, that is going to a space where then as jobs open up, recruiters are able to candidates get a potential score, a match score, and then they may reach out to you based on that and whatnot, but that's all based on what you put on your resume or on that profile that you're building out to. So
Yeah, I use that a lot, Vicki, like especially roles that are a little bit harder to fill. These softwares and like, I don't know, artificial intelligence or whatever it is that I don't understand will just basically tell me like, hey, this person is an ideal candidate based on what I've marked as requirements. And I can even select like a example resume, and then it will gather a bunch of resumes that are very similar to that for me. And then I can just reach out to that candidate if I want, if I'm not getting applicants that match what we're looking for. And so it's a lot on the like sourcing end or identifying candidates for the recruiter. That's what I use, I mean, every single day, pretty much.
Thanks. That's all good information.
All right, I have a question. How does negotiating differ if you're like in a performance review and wanting to negotiate a pay raise versus like, a new job? Like what would be your best tips for negotiation within a performance review?
Good question. Zach, did you want to go?
No, go ahead.
So for us, it depends again on the organization, and it depends on how things work. So we have a very defined algorithm for how merit increases go. So it's completely based on your position and range and your performance rating. So it is non-negotiable in that everybody has a merit increase that is given to them basis that algorithm, right? So in terms of negotiating for hire, it is somewhat limited. So what we do as an organization, so while Nicole, you're not able to negotiate a higher pay, you could have that conversation with your leader, and oftentimes what leaders will do is maybe supplement it with a one-time spot award or something. But what we do is we try to progress all employees towards market, right? And so it is a little bit challenging, at least in some of the larger organizations where this is very defined.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say that we're similarly structured, but the best way to continue to kind of move through is always be increasing your responsibility in terms of the scale and the scope, and who you interact with, whether it's a global or regional, like any opportunity or chance you get to grow your role, it puts you in a better position to be able to justify either we call it a grade promotion to jump to the next level, or maybe push on your HR group to say, like, I haven't had an equity adjustment in X number of years. I know the policy is 3 years, but with my increased responsibility and my performance of late in 2, I think that it needs to be justified now, right? And they can conduct that equity assessment. That's no problem.
Zach, can you define equity adjustment, please?
Yeah, so an equity adjustment would be, let's say an organization like Cummins, right? Every year the standard performance-based pay would be like a 3% raise, right? Sometimes that 3% over the span of a couple of years doesn't keep up with market rates or maybe with what your peers are making in your group. And so the HR in the area would say, like, okay, this person is 5% out of the range, and we need to make an equity adjustment to get them squared up with their peers or maybe with the market. Does that make sense?
Thanks.
Yep. And it's handled a little bit differently than a promotion.
Yeah. I think I would really lean on more regular development conversations with your manager, and that's where I would baseline start. That if you are wanting to do this, right, that you are having regular touch points, and sometimes they have to be, right, if sometimes they have to be driven by you as an individual, and just say, hey, want to check in, here's how I understand my goals are, my role, what I'm doing, I want to do more. I think to Zach's point, I think there's an underlay that you can get that promotion or you can get that increase in dollars if the company structure is right, but after you're already doing some of the new responsibilities or other responsibilities rather than before you do it. So it's almost like a prove it and then get it concept, but you have to set yourself up right in order to do that. So regular feedback loop conversations with your manager are always helpful.
Having said that, and I fully agree with you, having said that, one of the things that we try to do in our organization is to what Zach said, right? An annual view of, let me take a step back. So we have merit increases, right? Which is your standard increase that everybody gets, again, basis the algorithm, at least where I am. But then there's we also look at individuals to see where they are in position and range. So if they're well below in the range penetration, that generally means that they're being paid below market. Okay, usually midpoint is around what market would pay. So if that's the case, right, there are opportunities to do market adjustments. Usually what should happen is the HR organization has an annual view to say, okay, who all are not competitive and what can we do to kind of boost them up, right? So that happens more proactively from the organization. But if you genuinely feel that you are below market, do the research, understand what the market is paying, and have that conversation, because that's not a merit increase conversation. Okay, that is a salary adjustment to keep you competitive. But if you're going to do that, again, like we talked about with salary negotiations, make sure you've done your homework. A little tip: if you see a lot of people leaving because of pay, that's a pretty good indication that there's a little bit of vulnerability. And so if for you to be able to have a little bit of leverage, because we found that as well in certain countries, we're losing people left, right, and center to competitors and so on. So we have to act a little bit quickly. So all to say, right, it's don't wait for this to happen organically. If you feel like, again, if you genuinely feel like there is a disadvantage in your pay, bring it up and see what what the organization can do for you.
Okay, I have a question to follow up on that. We just were discussing doing research well and not just going off of what Google says. Do you have some good resources that you would recommend? I recently went from California to Indiana, and I just was oh, okay, Indiana prices, let's just 10,000 off or something like that, which wasn't right. But I did a lot of research and I didn't find verifiable, something that was that useful for me. Sorry for the background noise, lots going on.
I actually find Glassdoor to be pretty transparent. So Usually on Glassdoor, I think you can isolate a particular state or location that employee salary review was listed at, and that'll give you a pretty good indication, especially if your organization that you're looking at is fairly large. So you could probably go on and find all of Cummins' salaries pretty immediately, like on Glassdoor. That I would start there. In addition to you know, LinkedIn and Indeed, the way their algorithms work, if we're not directly listing their salaries, it's giving you an estimate, which is not always going to be reflective of the market or what type of role that is specifically. So you got to be real careful with some of those big job aggregator sites. But Glassdoor seems to be pretty good.
I agree with that, Glassdoor, because that's actual employees posting what their job is and what their salary is. And so that would be the first place I would go.
If you're doing on the front end too, any connection points or networking, you know, as you're starting your search process with people, that is something on LinkedIn, you can filter by location, like find people who are in that role or at that company and in that location. And I wouldn't be afraid in some of those informational conversations just to ask. I think it's a good tool to just help educate yourself too.
And even if you find like an old review on Glassdoor, just do like a inflation increase to get you up to whatever the current time frame is, right? So if it was 2 years ago, do 4 or 5% increase adjustment, and that'll get you pretty close to what that role is.
This conversation reminds me of just this research being really, really helpful on the front end, even before you apply, because most applications will ask you for what you're looking for in expected salary. And that is a filter that sometimes recruiters will be like, nope, too high. And for sure on the too high end, and on the low end, sometimes it's like, oh, maybe they may or may not have what we're looking for. So I think doing this on the front end, even before submitting your application, is helpful so that you can hit the nail on the dot with that.
The Department of Labor is also another good resource as well. I wanted to call out. They actually have a pretty big catalog of